The European Union and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization face a new fault line. One of their own members is charting an independent course, and that divergence may play directly into the hands of Moscow. At its centre stands Hungary, a NATO country and EU member led by Viktor Orbán, whose recent diplomatic manoeuvres have alarmed Brussels, stirred Moscow and raised a simple question: is Europe walking into a trap? Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in February 2022, the EU and NATO have sought to present a unified front. Sanctions on Moscow, military and humanitarian support for Kyiv, and collective security assurances. At the same time, Hungary remains a member of both organisations. It joined NATO in 1999 and the EU in 2004, anchoring its security and political commitments in the Western order. Yet for Hungary, this war has posed a deeper strategic challenge. The country remains heavily dependent on Russian energy supplies, including oil, gas and nuclear fuel imports. A recent Hungarian government plan even described that dependence on Russia as a risk under its new national energy strategy. Orbán's policy has been to carve out what he terms a peace mission role, keeping open the communication lines with Moscow, even as many Western partners see that gesture as a breach of solidarity. In July 2024, Orbán travelled to Moscow and met with Russian President Vladimir Putin, declaring Hungary would engage in dialogue. But the visit came without an EU or NATO mandate. The EU's legal service ruled that the visit breached EU treaties by undermining the bloc's objectives of solidarity and loyal cooperation. For Brussels and the capitals of the alliance, the concern is clear: a single member state taking a unilateral approach to Moscow during a time of high stakes, when Russia is increasingly viewed by NATO's Secretary-General as ready to punish Europe for supporting Ukraine. In October 2025, the event that crystallized the alarm came when Putin visited Budapest, an unprecedented spectacle for the EU and NATO. Budapest offered a venue at a time when the bloc is advancing its 19th sanctions package against Russia, and Hungary has repeatedly positioned itself as an outlier. Earlier the same month, Orbán delivered a speech in Hungary in which he told a large crowd, "We will not die for Ukraine, but we will live for Hungary." He accused Brussels of dragging Europe into war, while declaring that Budapest will be the capital of European peace. Orbán's messaging is consistent. He argues that Hungary must protect its national interest, that the EU's sanctions regime and military approach risk hurting ordinary Hungarians more than they hurt Russia, and that Hungary should maintain dialogue rather than confrontation. For example, he has been quoted saying the EU's sanctions had produced the opposite of their aims. They hurt Europe more than Russia. By hosting Putin and maintaining independent diplomatic contact, Hungary is effectively signalling, we are open to Russia, we will chart our own course, and we may act as a bridge or a wedge between Moscow and the West. What exactly is the mysterious message from Moscow? While there is no publicly verified formal communiqué, analysts interpret Hungary's outreach as a strategic signal from the Kremlin that it expects and incentivizes a fracture in Western unity. In effect, that message reads, if you break away, we will reward the divergence. You create leverage, we exploit it. One foreign policy expert wrote, Hungary's Prime Minister does not seem to grasp the gravity of the moment. If Ukraine is receiving new long-range missiles, things will only get worse for Putin and for his friend in Budapest. From Moscow's vantage point, the harder line the West takes, the more valuable a Western country that resists pressure becomes. By reaching out to Budapest, Russia can hope to A, weaken unified sanctions, B, sow doubt in EU-NATO cohesion, C, gain a listening post inside the alliance, and D, shape post-war settlement dynamics more favourably. Brussels has warned that we must avoid falling into a trap when a member state attempts a bilateral approach with Moscow outside the common strategy. In short, the trap is not a tank crossing the border. It is a diplomatic wedge being driven between allies. As the first part of this story has shown, Hungary's independent diplomacy has raised alarm bells in Kyiv, Berlin, Brussels and Washington. But what are the consequences of this divergence and what happens next? In part 2, we will examine the impact on NATO and the EU, why it matters strategically, possible scenarios, on-the-ground voices and the closing message. Hungary's actions matter for both the European Union's foreign policy coherence and NATO's deterrence posture. For the EU, many decisions require unanimity. A single member state can veto common positions, notably on defence and foreign affairs. When that member pursues a policy at odds with the collective, it weakens the bloc's ability to act as one. Analysts have argued that Hungary's internal democratic backslide is itself a critical internal challenge to the EU's credibility and capacity to act as a unified global actor. The legal service of the EU judged Orbán's Moscow trip a violation of the treaties, namely the requirement to act in a spirit of loyalty and mutual solidarity and avoid actions that jeopardize the Union's objectives. Such rulings raise deeper questions about how the EU enforces discipline and whether unanimity rules complicate rapid responses in crisis. For NATO, the integrity of the alliance depends on the adherence of every member to common deterrence principles. When a member appears to talk separately to Russia or to question the nature of the threat, the message to Moscow is that the alliance may have cracks. NATO's Secretary-General recently warned that Russia will punish Europe for supporting Ukraine. When one member hedges, the deterrence calculus becomes more complex. How can a nation commit collectively if one of its parts is arguing for a separate path? Moreover, the broader strategic stake is significant. The longer Russia perceives Western divisions, the more it might believe it can extend the war, drive wedges, or exploit bilateral deals behind closed doors. That undermines the entire Western posture of unified support for Ukraine and of credible deterrence. At its heart, this moment matters for four key reasons. Unity versus fragmentation. A unified West is costly to maintain, but powerful in effect. By contrast, a fragmented West gives Russia room to maneuver. Hungary's move threatens to tilt the balance toward fragmentation. Strategic leverage. If Russia can pick off one member state and engage bilaterally, it gains diplomatic leverage. It may use Hungary as a channel to influence EU/NATO processes, delay decisions, or extract concessions. Energy and economy. Hungary's dependency on Russian energy makes it economically vulnerable to Moscow's pressure tactics. During the war, Ukraine struck the Druzhba oil pipeline feeding Hungary and Slovakia, showing that energy dependence can be a strategic vulnerability. Precedent. If Hungary succeeds in its independent path without major pushback, other states may follow. The precedent of one member undercutting collective foreign policy unity could unravel long-standing institutional norms in the EU and NATO. Looking ahead, three broad scenarios emerge. Scenario A, Brussels reasserts unity. The EU and NATO respond to Hungary's divergence with pressure, legal, diplomatic or economic. Hungary backs down, returns to alignment, and the cohesion of the alliances is preserved. Scenario B, Hungary holds course, others follow, Hungary continues its independent diplomacy, and other member states begin to adopt similar positions, either out of national interest or opportunism. The Western alliance becomes less coherent, Russia gains diplomatic room, and the war in Ukraine drags on with higher risk of broader destabilization. Scenario C, compromise path. Hungary retains some autonomy, but accepts basic minimum alignment with EU/NATO policies. The alliances adapt to a looser model of cooperation, but in doing so reduce their capacity to act swiftly in crisis. Russia may exploit this slower rhythm. Each scenario carries costs. Scenario A preserves strength, but may force Hungary into uncomfortable concessions. Scenario B risks the strategic integrity of the alliance. Scenario C saves face, but may erode effectiveness. From Budapest, many ordinary Hungarians remain unconvinced of Russia as a direct threat. A 2025 survey found only 38% support increased defence spending, and many believe Hungary's interests are not aligned with Ukraine's. Opposition voices in Hungary argue that Orbán's policies risk isolating the country and making it a pragmatic vehicle for Moscow's aims. Hungary's army is wholly unprepared for any type of conflict with anyone, one analyst observed, citing the gap between rhetoric and capacity. Brussels officials express frustration. One EU diplomat said the logic is clear. With an attempt to divide the Union, we have to avoid falling into a trap. From Kyiv, the distrust is acute. The Ukrainian government has said that Hungary cannot play mediator between Russia and Ukraine alone, pointing to the fact that any peace deal without Ukraine's full participation simply rewards the aggressor. Europe stands at a crossroads. The choice is between collective strength and divided weakness, between strategic clarity and diplomatic ambiguity. Hungary's independent diplomatic dance may be framed as a peace mission, but the broader context shows a risk. The West could be walking into a trap of its own making. If the EU and NATO allow individual members to chip away at unity, then Russia wins not through new battlefields, but through old diplomacy, divide and conquer. The next months will tell whether Brussels and the alliance reassert their discipline or whether the fracture widens and the consequences deepen. For policymakers, the question is urgent. Will they hold the line? For citizens across Europe, the stakes are high. The future of the continent's security, its economic resilience and its place in the world are at stake.